Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the fourth Fall Asleep with Sith. Tonight, we will be doing even more Grimm fairy tales. And we'll start off with the story of Cinderella. Once upon a time, there was a rich man who lived happily with his wife for a long time, and they had one little girl together. Then the wife became ill, and as she became deathly ill, she called her daughter and said, "Dear child, I must leave you, but when I'm up in heaven, I shall look after you. Plant a little tree on my grave, and whenever you wish for something, shake the tree, and you shall have what you wish. And whenever you are otherwise in a predicament, then I'll send you help. Just stay good and pure." After she said this, she closed her eyes and died. Her child wept and planted a little tree on her grave, and there was no need for watering it, for her tears were good enough. The snow covered the mother's grave like a white little blanket, and by the time the sun had taken it off again and the little tree had become green for a second time, the man had married a new wife. However, the stepmother already had 2 daughters from her first husband. They had beautiful features, but proud and nasty and wicked hearts. After the wedding had now been celebrated, and all 3 entered the house, a difficult time began for the poor child.
"What's this terrible and useless thing doing in our rooms?"
The stepmother said.
"Off with you to the kitchen. Whoever wants to eat bread must first earn it. She can be our maid."
The stepsisters took away her clothes and dressed her in an old gray smock.
"Oh, you look good in that,"
they said, while mocking her and leading her to the kitchen, where the poor child had to do heavy work. She had to get up before dawn, carry the water into the house, make the fire, cook, and wash. Meanwhile, her sisters did everything imaginable to cause her grief and make her look ridiculous. They poured peas and lentils into the ashes of the hearth, so she had to sit there the entire day and separate them. In the evening, when she was tired, there was no bed for her, and she had to lie next to the hearth in the ashes. Since she was always rummaging in the dust and looked dirty, they named her Cinderella. At a certain time, the king decided to organize a magnificent ball that was to last 3 whole days, and his son was supposed to choose a bride at this event. The 2 proud stepsisters were also invited to it.
"Cinderella,"
they called.
"come up here, comb out our hair, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles. We are going to see the prince at the ball."
Cinderella worked hard and cleaned and brushed as well as she could. However, the stepsisters continually scolded her, and when they had finished dressing, they asked her in a mocking tone, "Cinderella, wouldn't you like to go to the ball?" "Oh yes," Cinderella replied, "but how can I go? I do not have any clothes."
"No," said the eldest daughter, "that's all we need for you to show up there. If the people heard that you were our sister, we'd be ashamed. You belong in the kitchen, where there's a bowl full of lentils. When we return, they must be sorted, and take care that we don't find a bad one among them. Otherwise, you know what will happen to you."
After the stepsisters left and Cinderella stood there, and looked after them. And when she no longer could see them, she went sadly into the kitchen and shook the lentils onto the hearth, and they had formed a very large pile. "Oh," she sighed and said, "I'll have to sort them until midnight, and I won't be able to shut my eyes no matter how much they may hurt. Oh, if only my mother knew of this." Then she knelt down in the ashes in front of the hearth and wanted to begin the sorting. All at once, 2 white pigeons flew through the window and landed next to the lentils on the hearth. They nodded with their little heads and said,
"Cinderella, would you like us to help you sort the lentils?"
"Yes," answered Cinderella. "The good ones for the little pot, and the bad ones for your little crop." And peck, 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 they began and ate the bad ones and let the good ones remain. And in a quarter of an hour, the lentils were so clean that there was not a bad one among them. And Cinderella could smooth them out in the little pot. Now the pigeons said to her,
"Cinderella, if you want to see your sisters dance with the prince, then climb up the pigeon coop."
Cinderella followed them and climbed to the top of the ladder of the pigeon coop and could see the entire ballroom from there. Indeed, she could see her sisters dance with the prince, and 1,000 chandeliers glittered and glistened before her eyes. And after she had seen enough, she climbed down the ladder. Her heart was heavy, and she laid herself down in the ashes and fell asleep. The next morning, the 2 sisters went into the kitchen, and when they saw Cinderella had cleaned and sorted the lentils, they were angry because they would have liked to have scolded her. Since they couldn't do that, they began to tell her about the ball and said,
"Cinderella, it was so much fun, especially the dance. The prince, who is the most handsome in the world, led us out onto the dance floor, and one of us will become his bride."
"Yes," Cinderella said, "I saw the chandeliers glimmer. That must have been splendid."
"What? How did you manage that?"
the elder sister asked.
"Oh, I climbed up the pigeon coop."
When the sister heard of this, she was filled with jealousy. She immediately ordered that the pigeon coop be torn down. Now Cinderella had to comb and clean again, and the youngest sister, who had a little bit of sympathy in her heart, said,
"Cinderella, when it turns dark, you can go to the ball and look through the windows." "No," said the eldest, "that will only make her lazy. Here's a sack of sweet peas, Cinderella. Sort the good ones from the bad ones and work hard. If you don't have them sorted cleanly by tomorrow, then I will spill them all into the ashes, and you'll have to start until you fish them out of the ashes."
Cinderella sat down on the hearth in distress and poured the peas out of the sack. Then the pigeons flew into the kitchen once again and asked in a friendly way,
"Cinderella, do you want us to sort the peas?"
"Yes. The good ones for the little pot, the bad ones for your little crop." Peck, 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 peck. It all went so quickly, as if 12 hands were there. And when they had finished, the pigeons said,
"Cinderella, do you want to go and dance at the ball?"
"Oh my God," she cried out. "But how can I go there in my dirty clothes?"
"Go to the little tree at your mother's grave, shake it and wish for clothes. However, you must return before midnight."
So Cinderella went to the grave and shook the little tree and spoke, "Shake and wobble, little tree, let beautiful clothes fall down to me." No sooner had she said all that than a splendid dress lay right before her, along with pearls, silk stockings, silver slippers, and everything else that belonged to her outfit. Cinderella carried everything into the house, and after she had washed herself and dressed herself, She was as beautiful as a rose washed by the dew. And when she stepped outside, a carriage stood there drawn by 6 black horses adorned with feathers. There were also servants dressed in blue and silver who helped her inside. Then off they galloped to the king's castle. When the prince saw the carriage come to a halt before the gate, he thought that a strange princess from afar had come traveling to the ball. So he himself went down the stairs, helped Cinderella out of the carriage, and led her into the ballroom. And when the glittering of 4,000 chandeliers fell upon her, she was so beautiful that everyone there was amazed. And the sisters also stood there and were very annoyed that some other young lady was more beautiful than they. However, they didn't think in the least that it might be Cinderella, who was presumably at home in the ashes. Now the prince danced with Cinderella and showed her royal honor. As he danced, he thought to himself, I'm supposed to choose a bride, and I know she's the only one for me. On the other hand, Cinderella had lived for such a long time in the ashes and sadness, and now she was in splendor and joy. But when midnight came, before the clock struck 12, she stood up, bowed goodbye. Even though the prince begged and begged, she refused to remain any longer. So the prince led her down the stairs. The carriage was below and waiting for her, and it drove off in splendor as it had come. When Cinderella arrived home, she went once again to the little tree on her mother's grave. "Shake and wobble, little tree, take these clothes away from me." Then the tree took the clothes, and Cinderella had her gray smock on again. And she returned to the kitchen with it, put some dust on her face, and laid herself down to sleep. In the morning the sisters came. They looked morose and kept quiet. Then Cinderella said, "You must have had an enjoyable time last night."
No, there was a princess there, and the prince almost always danced with her. Nobody had ever seen her before or knew where she came from.
"Oh, was it perhaps the lady who arrived in the splendid carriage pulled by 6 black horses?" Cinderella asked.
How do you know this?
I was standing in the entrance of the house and saw her drive by."
In the future, stay inside working,
said the eldest sister, who looked angrily at Cinderella.
What business do you have standing in the entrance of the house?
For a third time, Cinderella had to dress up the 2 sisters, and as a reward, they gave her a bowl with peas that she was to sort.
And don't you dare leave your work,
the eldest daughter cried out to her. Cinderella thought, if only my pigeons would return, and her heart beat anxiously until the pigeons came as they had previous nights, and said,
Cinderella, do you want us to help you sort the peas?
"Yes, the good ones for the little pot, the bad ones for your little crop." Once more the pigeons pecked the bad ones out, and once they were finished they said,
Cinderella, shake the little tree. It will throw down even more beautiful clothes. Go to the ball, but take care to return before midnight.
Cinderella went to her mother's grave. "Shake and wobble, little tree, let beautiful clothes fall down to me." Then the dress fell down, and it was even more glorious and even more splendid than the previous one. It was made out of gold and precious gemstones. In addition, there were golden stockings and gold slippers. And after Cinderella was completely dressed, she glistened, really like the sun at midday. A carriage drawn by 6 white horses that had plumes on their heads stopped in front of the house, and the servants were all dressed in red and gold. When Cinderella arrived, the prince was already on the stairs, and he led her into the ballroom. everyone had been astonished by her beauty the day before, they were even more astounded this evening, and the sisters stood in a corner and were pale with envy. If they had known it was Cinderella, who was supposed to be at home in the ashes, they would have died of envy. Now the prince wanted to know who the strange princess was, where she came from, and where she drove off. So he had people stationed on the road, and they were to pay attention to her whereabouts. Moreover, he had the stairs painted in black pitch, so she wouldn't be able to run so fast. Cinderella danced and danced with the prince, and was filled with so much joy that she didn't even think about midnight. All of a sudden, she was in the middle of a dance. She heard the clock strike. She was reminded of the pigeon's warnings and was terrified, so she rushed to the door and flew down the stairs. However, since they were covered with pitch, one of her golden slippers got caught, and Cinderella didn't stop to take it with her out of fear. Instead, she just reached the last step of the stairs as the clock struck 12. Consequently, the carriage, the horses, both disappeared, and Cinderella stood there in her grey smock on the dark road. In the meantime, the prince had rushed after her. He had found the golden slipper by the steps. He pulled it from the pitch and carried it with him. But by the time he made it down the stairs, everything had disappeared. Even the people who stood guard came and said they had seen nothing. Cinderella was glad that nothing worse had happened, and she went home. Once there, she turned on her dim oil lamp and hung it in the chimney, and laid herself down in the ashes. It didn't take long before the two sisters also returned and called out,
"Cinderella, get up and light the way."
Cinderella yawned and pretended that she had just woken from her sleep. As she showed them the way, she heard one of the sisters say,
"God knows who the presumable princess is. If she were only in her grave. The prince danced with her alone, and after she had gone he didn't want to remain, and the entire ball came to an end. It was as if all the lights suddenly had been blown out," the other said.
Meanwhile, the prince was thinking, if everything else has gone wrong for you, now the slipper will help you find your bride. So he had a proclamation announced and declared that whichever maiden's foot fit in the golden slipper was to become his wife. But the slipper was much too small for anyone who tried it on. Indeed, many couldn't even slip their foot into the slipper, and couldn't have done so even if the single slipper were two. Finally, it was the turn of the two sisters to take the test. They were glad because they had small, beautiful feet and believed that it couldn't go wrong for them, and the prince should have gone to them straight away.
"Listen," said the mother secretly. "Here's a knife. If the slipper is too tight for you, cut off a piece of your foot. It will hurt a bit, but what does that matter? It will soon pass, and one of you will become queen."
So the eldest sister went into the chamber and tried on the slipper. Her toe slipped inside, but her heel was too large. So she took her knife and cut off a part of her heel until she could force the foot into the slipper. Then she went out of the chamber to the prince, and when he saw that she had the slipper on her foot, he said that she was to be his bride. Then he led her to the carriage and wanted to drive off. However, when he came to the gate, the pigeons were above and called out,
"Looky, look, look. The shoe that she took. There's blood all over. The shoe's too small. She's not the bride that you met at the ball."
The prince leaned over and saw the blood that was spilling out of the slipper. He realized that he had been deceived. So he brought the false bride back to the house. However, the mother said to her second daughter,
"Take the slipper. If it's too short for you, then cut off one of your toes.
So the sister took the slipper into her chamber, and since her foot was too large, she bit her lip and cut off a large part of her toes. Then she quickly slipped her foot into the slipper and came out of the chamber. Since the prince thought that she was the right bride, he wanted to drive off with her. However, when he came to the gate, the pigeons called out again.
Looky, look at the shoe that you took. There's blood all over. The shoe is too small. She's not the bride you met at the ball.
The prince looked down and saw indeed that the stockings of the bride were colored red, and that her blood was streaming out of the slipper. So the prince brought her back to her mother and said, "She too is not the right bride, but is there another daughter in your house?"
No, said the mother. There's just nasty Cinderella. She sits below in the ashes. I'm sure the slipper would fit her.
The mother didn't want her summoned, but the prince demanded that she do so. Therefore, Cinderella was alerted, and when she heard that the prince was there, she washed her face and hands quickly, so they were fresh and clean. She then entered the room. She curtsied. Then the prince handed her the golden slipper and said, "Try it on. If it fits, you will become my wife." So Cinderella took off her heavy shoe from her foot and put the foot in the golden slipper. After she pressed a bit, her foot fit as though the slipper had been made just for her. And when she stood up, the prince looked at her face and recognized the beautiful princess once again and cried, "This is the right bride." The stepmother and the two haughty sisters were horrified and became pale. But the prince led Cinderella away. He helped her into the carriage, and as they drove off through the gate, the pigeons called out,
Looky, look, there's no blood at all. The golden shoe is a perfect fit. She truly is the bride you met at the ball.
The story of how some children played at slaughtering. In a city named Freneker, located in the West Friesland, some young boys and girls between the ages 5 and 6 happened to be playing with one another. They chose one boy to play the butcher, another boy was supposed to be the cook, and the third boy was supposed to be the pig. Then they also selected one girl to be cook and another girl to be her assistant. The assistant was to catch the blood of the pig in a little bowl so they could make sausages. As agreed, the butcher now fell upon the little boy playing pig, threw him on the ground, and slit his throat open with a knife, while the assistant cook caught the blood in her little bowl. A councilman was walking nearby when he saw the wretched act. He immediately took the butcher boy with him and led him into the house of the mayor, who instantly summoned the entire council. They deliberated about the incident and didn't know what to do with the boy, for they realized it had all been part of a children's game. One of the councilmen, a wise old man, advised the chief judge to take a beautiful red apple in one hand and a Rhenish gold coin in the other. Then he was to call the boy and stretch out his hand to him. If the boy took the apple, he was to be set free. If he took the gold coin, he was supposed to be killed. The judge took the wise man's advice. The boy grabbed the apple with a knife. Thus, he was set free without punishment. Part 2. There once was a father who slaughtered a pig, and his children saw that. In the afternoon, when they began playing, one child said to the other, "You be the little pig, and I'll be the butcher." He then took a shiny knife and slit his brother's throat. Their mother was upstairs in a room, bathing another child, and when she heard the cries of her son, she immediately ran downstairs. Upon seeing what had happened, she took the knife out of her son's throat and was so enraged that she stabbed the heart of the other boy, who had been playing the butcher, and she quickly ran back to the room to tend to her child in the bathtub. But while she had been gone, he had drowned in the tub. Now the woman became so frightened and desperate that she wouldn't allow the neighbors to comfort her and finally hung herself. When her husband came back from the fields and saw everything, he became so despondent that he died soon thereafter. The story of the little mouse, the little bird, and the sausage. Once upon a time, there was a little mouse, a little bird, and a sausage that came together and set up a house. For a long time, they lived together in peace and happiness, and they managed to increase their possessions by a considerable amount. The little bird's job was to fly into the forest every day and bring back wood. The mouse had to carry water, light the fire, and set the table, while the sausage did the cooking. Now, if things go too well for people, they always look for new things. So one day, as the bird was flying about, he came upon another bird, and he boasted and told him about his superb situation. But the other bird called him a poor sap, because he had to do most of the work, while the other two friends had easy lives. For instance, after the mouse had started the fire and carried the water into the house, she generally went to her little room and rested until she was called to set the table. The sausage stayed by the pot and kept an eye on the cooking. And right at mealtime, he slid through the stew and vegetables to make sure everything was salted, seasoned, and ready to eat. As soon as the little bird came home and laid down his bundle, they would sit at the table, and after finishing their meal, they would sleep soundly until the next morning. Such was their glorious life. However, the little bird had been disturbed by what the other bird had said the previous day, and told his companions that he had been their slave long enough, and was no longer going to be taken for a fool. He wanted them to change and try another arrangement. No matter how long the mouse and the sausage vehemently argued against this, the bird dominated and insisted that they try a new way. So they drew lots, and it fell upon the sausage to go into the woods. The mouse became the cook, and the bird was to fetch water. After the sausage went to fetch wood, the bird started the fire, and the mouse put the kettle on the stove. Then they waited for the sausage to return home with the wood for the next day. However, the sausage was gone for such a long time that the others started to feel uneasy, and the bird flew out a little way to meet him. Not far from their home, the sausage had encountered a dog. Now this dog had considered the sausage free game and had grabbed him and swallowed him down. The little bird arrived and accused the dog of highway robbery, but it was of no use, for the dog maintained that there were forged letters found on the sausage, and therefore the sausage had to pay for this with his life. Now the little bird sadly picked up the wood and carried it back home. He told the mouse what he had seen and heard, and they were very distressed. Nevertheless, they agreed to do the best they could and stayed together. Meanwhile, the little bird set the table and the mouse prepared the meal. She intended to put the finishing touches on it by seasoning it and sliding through the vegetables the way the sausage used to. But before she even reached the middle of the vegetables, she got stuck and had to pay for it with her life. When the bird came to serve the meal, there was no cook. He became so upset that he scattered the wood all over the place, calling and searching for the mouse, but his cook was no longer to be found. Since the little bird was so distracted, he didn't notice that the wood had caught fire and the house went up in flame. The bird rushed out and fetched some water, but the bucket slipped and fell into the well, dragging the bird along. Since he couldn't manage to get out on his own, he was left to drown. The story of Mother Holle. A widow had 2 daughters. One was beautiful and diligent, the other ugly and lazy. But the mother was fonder of the ugly, lazy one, and the other one had to do all the work, just like the Cinderella in the house. Now one day the beautiful maiden went out to fetch some water, and as she bent over to pull the bucket from the well, she leaned over too much and fell into the water. And when she awoke and came to her senses, she was lying on the ground in a beautiful meadow where the sun was shining and thousands of flowers were growing. She left the meadow, and soon she came to a baker's oven full of bread. But the bread was yelling, "Oh, take me out, take me out, take me out or I'll burn. I've already been baked long enough." So she went to the oven and diligently took everything out. After she moved on, she came to a tree full of apples. "Oh, shake me," the tree exclaimed. "All my apples are ripe." So she shook the tree until the apples fell like raindrops, and she kept shaking until they all had fallen to the ground. After that she moved on. At last she came to a small cottage where an old woman was looking out of the window. She had such big teeth that the maiden was scared and wanted to run away. But the old woman cried after her, "Oh, don't be afraid, my dear child. Stay with me, and if you do all housework properly, everything will turn out well for you. You must only make sure that my bed is nicely made, and give it a good shaking so the feathers fly. Then it will snow on earth, for I am Mother Holle." Since the old woman had spoken so kindly to her, the maiden agreed to enter her service. She took care of everything to the old woman's satisfaction, and always shook the bed so hard that feathers flew about like snowflakes. In return, the woman treated her well. She never said an unkind word to the maiden, and she gave her roasted or boiled meat every day. After the maiden had spent a long time with Mother Holle, her heart saddened. Even though everything was 1,000 times better than at home, she still had a yearning to return. At last she said to Mother Holle, "I've got a tremendous longing to return home, and even though everything is wonderful here, I can't stay any longer." "You are right," Mother Holle responded, "and since you've served me so faithfully, I shall bring you up there again." She took the maiden by the hand and led her to a large gate. When it was opened, and the maiden was standing beneath the gateway, an enormous shower of gold came pouring down, and all the gold stuck to her, so she became completely covered with it. "I want you to have this because you've been so diligent," said Mother Holle. Thereupon, the gate closed, and the maiden found herself up on the earth. Then she went to her mother, and since she was covered with so much gold, her mother gave her a warm welcome. Then, when her mother heard how she had obtained so much wealth, she wanted her other ugly and lazy daughter to have the same good fortune. Therefore, this daughter also had to jump down the well. Like her sister, she awoke in the beautiful meadow and walked along the same path. When she came to the oven, the bread cried out, take me out, or I'll burn. I've already been baked long enough." But the lazy maiden answered, "Do you think I want to dirty myself?" She moved on. Soon she came to the apple tree that cried out, "Oh, shake me, my apples are all ripe." However, the lazy maiden replied, "Are you serious? One of those apples could fall and hit me on the head." So she left the tree. When she came to Mother Holle's cottage, she wasn't afraid because she had already heard about the old woman's big teeth, and she hired herself out right away. On the first day, she made an effort to work hard and obey Mother Holle when the old woman told her what to do, for the thought of gold was on her mind. On the second day, she started loafing, and on the third day, she loafed even more. Indeed, she didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. And she did a poor job of making Frau Holle's bed. She certainly didn't shake it hard enough to make the feathers fly. Soon Mother Holle became tired of this and discharged the maiden from her service. The lazy maiden was quite happy to go, and now expected the shower of gold. Mother Holle led her to the gate. But as the maiden was standing beneath the gateway, a big kettle of pitch came pouring down over her instead of gold.
This is the reward for your services,
Mother Holle said, and closed the gate. The lazy maiden went home covered with pitch, and it stuck to her for as long as she lived. The Three Ravens. Once upon a time, there was a mother who had 3 little sons who were playing cards one day next to the church. And when the sermon was finished, their mother returned home and saw what they had been doing. So she cursed her godless children, and they were immediately turned into 3 coal-black ravens who flew away. The 3 brothers, however, had a little sister who loved them with all her heart, and she grieved so much over their banishment that she no longer had any peace of mind, and finally set out to look for them. The only thing that she took with her for the long, long journey was a little stool on which she rested when she became too tired, and she ate nothing the entire time but wild apples and pears. Unfortunately, she couldn't find the 3 ravens, but one time when they had flown over her head, one of them had dropped a ring. And when she picked it up, she recognized it as the ring she had given to her youngest brother one time as a present. The sister continued her journey, and she went so far, so very far, until she came to the end of the world and went to the sun, which was, however, much too hot and ate small children. So after that she went to the moon, which was, however, much too cold and also mean. And when it saw her, it said, I smell human flesh." So the maiden left there quickly and went to the stars, which were good to her, and each one sat on a little stool. And the morning star stood up and gave her a gammy leg to help her open the gate to the glass mountain.
"If you don't have this little leg, you won't be able to climb the glass mountain. It's on the glass mountain that you will find your brothers."
So the sister took the gammy leg, wrapped it in some clothes, and continued her journey until she came to the glass mountain. However, the gates was closed, and just as she wanted to take the gammy leg from the cloth, she discovered that she had lost it along the way. Since she didn't know what to do, she took a knife, sliced off her pinky, and stuck it in the lock, and opened the gate. Then a little dwarf came towards her and said,
"My child, what are you looking for here?"
"I'm looking for my brothers, the 3 raven."
"The Lord Ravens are not at home," the little dwarf said. "If you want to wait, then come in."
And the little dwarf brought 3 little plates and 3 little mugs, and the sister ate a bit from each little plate and drank a sip from each little mug, and she let the little ring fall into the last mug. All of a sudden, a whizzing and buzzing could be heard in the air.
"Oh, the Lord Ravens are flying back home,"
said the little dwarf, and the little ravens began to speak one after the other.
"Who has eaten of my little plate? Who has drunk from my little mug?"
As the 3rd raven, however, came to his little mug, he found the ring and saw clearly that their little sister had arrived. They recognized her because of the ring, and they were all saved and transformed and were happy to go home. The story of Little Red Cap, or as it is more well known as, Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a sweet little maiden. Whoever laid eyes upon her couldn't help but love her. But it was her grandmother who never gave the child enough. One day she made her a present, a small red velvet cap. And since it was so becoming and the maiden always wanted to wear it, people only called her Little Red Cap. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Cap, take this piece of cake and bottle of wine and bring them to your grandmother. She's sick and weak, and this will strengthen her. Be nice and good and greet her from me. Go directly there, do not stray from the path, otherwise you'll fall and break the glass, and your grandmother will get nothing." Little Red Cap promised to obey her mother. Well, the grandmother lived out in the forest, half an hour from the village, and as soon as Little Red Cap entered the forest, she encountered the wolf. However, Little Red Cap didn't know what a wicked sort of animal he was, and was not afraid of him.
"Good day, Little Red Cap,"
he said. "Well, thank you kindly, wolf."
Where are you going so early, Little Red Cap?"
"To grandmother's."
What are you carrying under your apron?"
"Cake and wine. My grandmother is sick and weak, and yesterday we baked this cake, so it will help her get well."
"Well, where does your grandmother live, Little Red Cap?"
About a quarter of an hour from here in the forest. Her house is under 3 big oak trees. You can tell it by the hazel bushes," said Little Red Cap.
The wolf thought to himself, "What a juicy morsel she'll be for me. Now, how am I going to catch her?"
Then he said,
"Listen, Little Red Cap. Haven't you seen the beautiful flowers growing in the forest? Why don't you look around? I believe you haven't even noticed how lovely the birds are singing. You march along as if you were going straight to school in the village, and yet it is so delightful here in the woods."
Little Red Cap looked around and saw that the sun had broken through the trees, and that the woods were indeed full of beautiful flowers. So she thought to herself, "If I bring grandmother a bunch of flowers, she'll certainly like that. It's still early and I will arrive on time." So she plunged into the woods to look for flowers, and each time she plucked one, she saw another that was even prettier than the last one, and ran after it, going deeper and deeper into the forest. But the wolf went straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door.
"Who is there?"
"Little Red Cap, I have brought you some cake and wine. Open up."
Just lift the latch," the grandmother called. "I am too weak and can't get up."
The wolf lifted the latch, and the door sprang open. Then he went straight to the grandmother's bed and gobbled her up. Next, he took her clothes and put them on along with her nightcap, lay down in her bed, and drew the curtains. Meanwhile, Little Red Cap had been running around looking for flowers, and only when she had as many as she could carry did she continue on her way to her grandmother. She was puzzled when she found the door open, and as she entered the room, it seemed so strange inside that she thought, "Oh my God, how frightened I feel today, and usually I like to be at grandmother's." Then she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother, with her cap pulled down over her face, giving her a strange appearance. "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have!"
The better to hear you with."
"Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have!"
The better to see you with."
"Oh, grandmother, what big hands you have!"
The better to grab you with."
"Oh, grandmother, what a terribly big mouth you have!"
The better to eat you with."
No sooner did the wolf say that than he jumped out of bed and gobbled up poor little Redcap. After the wolf had the fat chunks in his body, he lay down in the bed again, fell asleep, and began to snore very loudly. A huntsman happened to be passing by the house and thought to himself,
"Oh, the way the old woman is snoring. You'd better see if something's wrong."
He went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf lying in it. He had been searching for the wolf for a long time, and thought that the beast had certainly eaten the grandmother.
"Perhaps she can still be saved," he said to himself. "I won't shoot."
So he took some scissors and cut open the wolf's belly. After he made a couple of cuts, he saw the little Redcap shinning forth. And after he made a few more cuts, the girl jumped out and exclaimed, "Oh, how frightened I was! It was so dark in the wolf's body." Soon the grandmother emerged alive too. Little Redcap quickly fetched some heavy stones that they filled the wolf's body with. When he woke and tried to run away, the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once and died. All three were delighted. The huntsman skinned the fur of the wolf. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that little Redcap had brought. And little Redcap thought to herself, "Never again will you stray from the path by yourself and go into the forest when your mother has forbidden it." Good night, my friends. May the dark side watch over you. Sleep tight and don't let the Jedi bite.